Khalil Gibran once said, "Out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls. The most massive characters are seared with scars." The Vulnerable Power Show is a deep dive into the heart of leadership. Hear raw insights and wisdom from experienced leaders who transformed during their dark night of the soul journey, now bringing light to the world. Spotlighting heart-centered leaders that have transformed, stepping into their fullest light and mission. Learn how you, too, can weather life's storm and thrive. What are the keys for successful personal growth and life-changing transformation? It is my intention to bring you wisdom, empowerment, hope, and inspiration, so you too can ascend to your fullest light as a leader, to bring about impact for the collective good. Greetings, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Vulnerable Power Show. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into the heart of Molly's leadership. I have a dear soul sister and colleague with me. Molly, thank you for joining today.
Thank you for having me, Hass.
It's a pleasure. And as always, we're here with the intention of bringing you insight into transformation, with the intention to inspire other leaders that there is hope to dive deep into this process, to step into heart-centered and vulnerable leadership. So Molly and I actually met through a networking group and then shared space one-on-one after being in my first interviews group, Brian Kelly's group. And we hit it off. We have a lot of shared resonance and spiritual path, as well as the mixture of our spiritual and our practical, what we do day to day. So it's a sheer delight to have her here. Molly, let's start off and dive right into what you feel inspired to share about how you went through your own storm or metamorphosis. You used the analogy of a caterpillar. How did you blossom into a butterfly is what I'm hoping for us to explore. So without further ado, why don't you take the mic and share with us what comes through as far as your transformational journey?
Well, there's so much that has gone on in my life, just like all of us. And I'll briefly share the context and background that I am a child refugee of war. I was born into war and then escaped the country of Laos when I was a child with my family on a tiny little boat in the dark of night.
Wow.
Eventually, we arrived at the refugee camps in Thailand and then made our way to the United States of America. My nature is that I am a quiet soul, an old soul, if you will. My best friend growing up was my grandmother. And we spent so much time together. She taught me things about the olden times and the olden days and medicine and plants and nature and speaking to animals almost through the mind. I learned meditation with my grandmother.
Wow.
So all of those things really kind of make me want to stay in this warm, safe, sacred place of being an introvert. I like the simplicity of that, not having to worry about the world, not having to be part of anything bigger than my garden, my home, my backyard, my safe comfort blanket of family and loved ones. And pre-interview, we talked about this concept of the caterpillar. I feel cozy when I'm a caterpillar. But then there's something within me, a calling deep within that constantly comes. It's like a chime. It's like when I get too comfortable and wrapped too warmly in my blanket, this chime is always there. And then it gets louder and louder when I don't step in to the role of being some type of change agent or doing some good, something greater than staying home and being comfortable. And as we talked about how pain and trauma kind of wakes you up and allows you to honor things like life and I lost a fiance when I was 27 years old. And I think that was really the first time in my adult life that I realized that being comfortable, although great, oftentimes it's not always the option. Sometimes life creates these big moments for us to force ourselves out of being comfortable, for us to force ourselves out of routine. And great, love is good. I have this, I have that, everything's in place, and all of a sudden, boom. And I just feel like it's the universe, it's God's way, it's the divine power's way to say there's more for you to do. When I lost my fiance, I really believe that that was when I truly woke up to life. Death really brought me to life. And he passed away in a drowning accident. I witnessed it. It was 3 months before our wedding, so you can see my world completely turned upside down. And yet, I just knew that it had to happen for a reason. It just didn't make sense otherwise. Why did this happen if it weren't for some greater purpose? And that's really where this whole idea of what does it mean to fully live? When I think about my fiance and I think about my father who passed away from a very short battle with cancer, and I think about my best friend who took his own life.
Wow.
All of those losses, every time, kept gifting me with what's yours to do while you have time. So that's what I wanted to kind of, talk to you about today is sometimes even if we don't want to blossom into the butterfly, life offers up these moments that are just undeniably ours to force us to step into the light and force us to wake up to the preciousness and the miraculousness of our own existence.
I love that. It's funny when you mentioned your garden. In second grade, I was the gardener in the play of The Secret Garden. So I was the one responsible for tending the secret garden. So very apt metaphor here. So who knows? Maybe you were, I forget the girl's name. You know that story, right? The Secret Garden?
Yes,
I think they made it into a movie. Yeah. Maybe in another life, I was the gardener and you were the gal. So let me ask you, you said something very fascinating. Did you know in that moment, obviously not in that moment, around the time that you lost your fiance in that tragic accident, did you know and have that realization that this is a gift? Like, was that immediate, or when did that come to fruition for you that, okay, this is a blessing for me? And well, blessing is maybe the wrong word. You get what I mean, that this is that gift in a sense that you alluded to.
I think it was the loss actually was the gift in a way. It's hard to even say that out loud, but for the context of our sharing today, the gift was really that I had just accepted life as comfortable. And when things came into my life that were good, I was like, okay, it was just a check, kind of checking off the checklist of all the things that I had planned. I wanted to be engaged by the time I was 27. I was 27 at that time. I wanted to have, start a family by the time I was 30. And you put all these plans in place. And when that happened, it was like, we have will, we have the desire, we have the capacity to plan, but we also have what's called the unknown. It's the spiritual part of things. It's not the physical part of things. It's the things we can't touch and feel. It's the other sources of power and influence that are a part of this journey as well. And that loss, as painful as it was really the gift of me to truly see every breath as a gift, every morning I wake up as a gift, every relationship I have as a gift. And I'll give you an example, Hass. When my grandmother passed away many years ago, she had fallen and broken her hip. And then she fell again, and her health worsened. So the second time we took her to the nursing home or the facility where she stayed, I remember knowing from that intuitive place, that gift that I also came with, that her time on earth was fleeting. It was short. And I remember thinking, if I knew then what I know now, I would have captured intentionally and more consciously all the beautiful moments. And so as I laid there in the hospice, in the nursing home, I asked my grandmother if I could lay with her and take a nap. And then when she fell asleep, I just watched her breath and her veins, the oxygen go like this. And that was such a powerful moment, because as she was sleeping and I was watching that, I looked out and I remember every single visual of the garden that was outside her window. So when I miss her and I want to feel her alive in the physical form, I can easily close my eyes, because I captured that moment so intentionally that it is so visual to me when I close my eyes. I share this because I want to give the world with this. This is a learning that I had. I didn't know to do this with my first loss with Chris. So when I close my eyes and I think of him, I have blurry memories. I have the feeling overall is good, but razor sharp visuals are not quite there. With my grandmother, with my father, with my best friend, because those passings happened after Chris, I was able to capture moments when Dad called me during lunch and he would ask me, "What are you eating today?" And I would ask him, "What are you eating today?" And I could hear his laughter and I could remember every single word. So in this process, everything I do is almost like meditating through life, capturing every single moment and living it with the purest intentions of being here, being present, capturing every moment. And so that when these physical manifestations of our loved ones go away, they are still very much a part of me.
That is very moving. I'm tearing up because now I know we're definitely soul twins. Very moving, because for me, equally, as you know, when I lost my brother, very few people know this. I think maybe only 2 people know this. Something kind of, I guess, from the outside may seem morbid. Similar to you, I didn't have any, last time with him, so to speak. So when I was actually called to the hospital and he had taken his life, I actually opened his eyes on his corpse because I wanted to because I regretted not having that sharp memory you speak to. And it was soon thereafter that I pulled a card from an oracle deck that was grief. And grief is a gift because we learn to cherish. And that's what we mean by loss is a gift. And I honor you for bringing that up. It's very moving, and it brought up tears for me, because that's something that was equally a learning gift for me. Because after that, where I didn't have that sharp memory with my brother. After that, it's been very vivid, and I've made sure to be fully present. And it's almost like a stoicness is what I call it, that this may be the last time I can sit with Molly. Let me, God forbid, let me fully be present with this and make it like so vivid, so real, that's so immersed in it. And I honor you for bringing that forward. That's important for the audience to hear, because that was my pain. That was a very deep wound for me. And it's a challenge, because then we can't go back. We can only move forward. So let me ask you, after that, how did it shape you in terms of this mystery of life? I love that you brought that out too, that we have the known and then we have the unknown. And that mystery of life, there's a lot of magic and wonder in there and the growth. How did your orientation shift as a result of being around these tragedies? And how did you then transition into embracing more? So if you can unpack how that shifted for you after or during.
Right. I feel that when strong emotions come into our lives, it does shake us up. And in my case, that shake up really shook me open. And as a young child, as you can imagine, and Hass, you know this, but the audience doesn't know this, my grandmother had gifts, special gifts. And I don't know that she would have called it clairvoyancy, but she had something special. And they usually came through dreams. And I know I have some of that. Maybe not as powerful or as tapped in as she had, but I certainly have it. But as a young child, I didn't know what that was. So it scared the heck out of me. And part of that little girl is still scared
Mm.
because I don't know how much power is within that bag of gifts that came with me.
Mm.
And so when this loss happened, it was like I had closed the door to a lot of the gifts as a young child because I had too much to focus on as a little girl. I came here in a society that my parents didn't understand. I
Mm.
became an adult pretty early on. The moment we arrived here, we were teaching our parents. So I didn't have
Mm.
time for those extracurricular activities to explore my gifts. I was just trying to make ends meet. And so that was stuffed away. But if those things came with you or came with us, they can't just be put under a shelf. They will find a way to like scream at you or show up somehow.
Mm.
And because I had put away these gifts, my intuition, the messages that would come through in dreams, I didn't want them. So I would say, please go away. I don't have time for you. You scare me, because sometimes I would dream things that came true. Like I
Mm.
knew that something horrible, a tragedy was going to happen the day before my fiance passed away. And in fact, he was the first person I called. And I said, someone close to me is going to die. I just knew it already. I just didn't
That's
translate that into
ironic.
that it was going to be him.
Mm.
And
Interesting.
so all the more reason after that happened to tell myself, you don't want these gifts. These are scary
Mm.
gifts.
Mm.
But then I found myself saying it, but my body was not having it. My spiritual self was not having it. So after the passing happened, I would have all these downloads. I would just have images and dreams. I dreamt of Chris for almost 3 months every night.
Yeah.
And it was really more of an urging for me to allow my gifts to open up. And if I had not allowed it to open up, I wouldn't have been able to tap in to those messages he sent to me from the afterlife through my dreams,
Mm.
which I believe helped to lend itself to my healing. Uh, and so that's really where it began. I just said, okay, I can't push stop on gifts that came with me. I can't hide it away. It's going to show itself up, and it's better to just accept it.
Mm.
And it's better to just start to develop it and start to explore naturally what my gifts are. So it's been a journey, and I'm tapped in a lot more now, and I listen more, and I get more messages because I am not fighting it so much.
So yeah, let's pause there. I'm curious. So if you were to go back and maybe you know already, when we're talking about suppressing, right? Suppressing our gifts, or Brian Kelly mentioned it as suppressing our essence or our light. Did that take a toll on you in human form? And if so, how? In other words, what was the cost of the suppression of those gifts? If you've ever looked at it that way? Can you
Absolutely.
unpack that for the audience?
Oh, absolutely. I had so many different types of health issues. I was the thinnest. Everybody was telling me, gosh, you look so great. You look so
Mm.
pretty. Everything
Mm.
from the outside
Mm.
looked perfect. But because I was suppressing those gifts, my own emotions, my acceptance of my full self, I had a lot of visits to the doctor's office, and they
Mm.
couldn't figure out what was wrong because I had the ideal weight. I was working out. People looked at me and kept saying, wow, you're so fit. But
Mm.
I kept having things show up in my sleep patterns. I
Mm.
was tired a lot. I had a lot of different infections, but
Mm.
there was just no other
Mm.
symptoms that led to these infections. So it was very strange.
Mm.
And it was because once I started to really unpack it, as you keep saying, and
Mm.
ask myself, what else is going on? What is my body trying to tell me about the whole of me? Who I am holistically, who I am spiritually, who I am in this package. That's when it started to really smooth out the ride from a physical standpoint in terms of my health. I didn't have as many visits. I haven't been sick in years. I had a little cold this year,
Mm.
and it lasted for about 4 or 5 days. And that's been it for the last 4 or 5 years.
The direct correlation, right, between the energy and the body.
Yeah.
and how it's very real, and the body intelligence knows. That's really, as we dive deeper, I go, wow. And same with Brian, it shows us how one we all are. Because that was, I may have mentioned it to you, I had necrosis, and my elder brother, who's the famous physician, said, this is very weird, because we don't know the source of this necrosis. Like, it didn't follow a normal pathway for the infection and the way my body. So it's fascinating, because it speaks to our multidimensional existence, right? That it's not always logical, and we can't only move forward logically. So if we were to dive into that, because it's a very pertinent topic for me, the powers, the gift, and a lot of what I'm learning I'm doing is bringing forth power in people, and showing them how to reconnect to their own power. What is it that you from your perspective is within our human existence, our human experience, that makes us afraid of those superpowers? Because we're talking extrasensory. We're not talking ordinary. We're talking extraordinary now, because you and I have spoken about it candidly. So why do you feel that's our nature? Because I feel like even people that don't have maybe superpowers at this moment, that may develop them later, maybe they'll benefit from this. Because for me, it was similar suppression. Only I wouldn't say I was scared of it. I had a different orientation to my power. Mine was more culturally, it wasn't apropos. It wasn't appropriate to do it. So you were fortunate, in my perspective, to have the grandmother who was, on that spiritual side. So for you, what was your journey in terms of your orientation to the power and the fear around the power? Why do you think that is for you?
For me, and I think for many people, we just are afraid of the impact of that power, that it could be negative, that it could hurt others, that we could unintentionally open up something in people with our gifts and our power, if you will, that is not of pure intention. And so I'm very mindful about my intention, and that's one thing that I can control. If I am getting a message, I want to make sure that my ego is not driving what comes out of my mouth, that it really is operating as a true messenger. But you can't operate as a true messenger all the time because we're in human form. And so when you get those messages, I constantly have to make sure I calibrate and ask myself, okay, I think there's a power, and we talked about this a little bit, Hass, and I want to reiterate this. There's a power that comes along with this gift. And that word power in itself is so powerful. And I think human beings are afraid to use it for the wrong reasons, especially if we are trying very, very hard to operate from that spiritual place. But for me, when I say I'm afraid, is because I'm also in human form. Like, we're not walking around in this, in this spiritual cloud where we're all pure and we can just easily message what comes to us. There's a filtering system that happens based on the humanness of us. And that's where my fear comes from is, when I get these messages, am I misinterpreting them because my ego is getting in the way and trying to show off in some way? And that's not pure intention. So it's really about working on that part for me, that human physical part, that ego part of me, so that when my gifts come through, it will automatically be that it is leaving me for the purest intention for that person, and not for me to gain anything, notoriety, or, oh, that's so cool, whatever it is. Because that's just as honest as I can get, Hass, about my challenge and my struggle is we're all driven by ego as humans. And it's becoming more spiritual, more connected, getting back to that soul level where I still have a lot of work to do, so that my gifts can just flow through me.
Beautifully said. Yeah, it's interesting. I think of that Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility, which always resonated for me. And it's interesting that you said power, and people like kind of have that orientation to it. I met a colleague a couple of years ago, kind of actually a few years ago now, at the beginning of my sabbatical. And he said to me in our one-on-one, which was very fascinating, he said, Hass, do you know what the last taboo word in the world is? And I sat there kind of stumped, and he said, power. And we now talk about sex openly. We have more sexual transparency than ever in society. And the one thing left, and when he said that, it was a very big eye opener. And I said, wow, that's fascinating. So let me go to the flip side of that, because this came through very inspired. what's the risk that we run, right? Because the pendulum can swing both ways and striking that balance. What's the risk that we can run by over analyzing and kind of erring too much on the side of caution? Do you see that also equally as a, I guess you could say, perilous path? I mean, what's your orientation with that? Like almost over analyzing it and then never using it in a
Yeah,
sense.
always. Always. That's really why you want to find that balance. You know, the fact that I'm even having this conversation as openly as I am about my fears of my ego driving it, that same exact statement is true when I think about why am I focused so much on that? Because it's really about the message that needs to get delivered right now. You know, it's like, are you even being selfish because you want to make sure that the ego is not in the way? Because if the message is really profound and clear for whoever is supposed to get it, it should be that there is no effort. It should leave. And this happens a lot too. I know when that message is really powerful, I'll use that word again, because it will leave my mouth before I could catch it. It's already gone. And then I'm like, what did just happen?
God doesn't want you to stop it. It's like, we're not going to let her think about it. It's going to pop out before you. Oh, wait, what did I say?
Yes. I admire those that have really practiced and also fully accepted their gifts. I'm not exactly there yet, but I admire it so much because they are so in flow. They don't have these thoughts at all. It's just like, I am gifted with this. I don't have to make excuses. I don't have to, I just have to let it flow. And I'm going to get there. And I just admire it because it really has nothing to do with me. The gifts are coming through me as a channel, but the actual message has nothing to do with me. It is supposed to be delivered. It is supposed to be gifted to whomever is in front of me who is supposed to get that message. So working on that part for me, I just love it when people have, when those that are truly connected and aligned and have worked out all of the physical human parts so they can truly be the gift that they are. That to me is amazing. And I'd love to get there one day.
It's interesting because it's like, and the more I notice we have like complementary, I guess, experiences, because mine is that I used to bring it out very inspired and now I'm more discerning or filtering. So it's almost like an opposite or, you know, converse experience for me of like, maybe too flow is too much. So it's fascinating how we have, you know, the mirrors in the universe, you know, we're all fragments of the whole in a sense. And that was very much my process. And I like what you said, to depersonalize has been really my learning this year of now that I've owned the power to use that and fine tuning that it's not about me, which you're right. Candidly, a lot of my experience in the spring with some of the people you and I have talked about, you know, the groups that I became a part of and I had to kind of remove myself or choose to remove myself from, there was this like innate, shall I say, like analysis almost that I was doing of taking it personally and then learning, okay, I'm a messenger. I'm the instrument of God. It's not my message per se. And it's funny because you're right. I sense for half, you know, that are on my side of the spectrum, that's the lesson of this isn't you doing it. And then on the other side of the spectrum, it's well, it is me doing it. You know, it's this funny existentialism about it.
Just
So
the
what,
fact that we're talking about this means that there is a balance here. There is that perfect mix of discernment. And then also when you get to that place of trust, and I think it comes down to trusting ourselves, trusting our own spiritual journey, trusting that we are ready, we are here to do the work. When we get to that place, it really is about releasing it. And when you can do that so beautifully, then you don't have to have that conversation about this is my ego, am I sharing too much, am I being too analytical? I just would like to be able to wake up one day and just have all these messages come through me, and I don't even realize I'm giving the messages away until someone says to me, hey, remember when you told me that? And I'm like, I have no idea. That would be so perfect if I just don't remember because it left me and it wasn't for me to actually analyze it all. That would be amazing.
I have that happen and I get worried. So again, it's my experience is the opposite. I go, was I supposed to? Wait, what? I said that? Oh my God. Okay. All right. So it's funny, again, the mirroring of the experience. So you said the caterpillar. So as you emerge from this proverbial cocoon, and as you move forward from the death of your fiance, what did your metamorphosis look like? If you can flush out, as comfortable as you are, kind of more of the cocoon process. What did it look like after his passing, in terms of how did you come to these realizations that we've been alluding to, the gifts and the realization that this is a blessing and that I'm awakening to this and I'm blossoming from this? What was the precursor to that awakening? What did that look like for you?
Well, the journey continued after he passed away, and I still defaulted to the stuff that made me feel comfortable, which was to keep busy. So for many years, I just threw myself into work. I became a workaholic. I didn't want to deal with the pain of the loss. I was trying to erase images of the accident itself because I was there to basically identify the body, those things. I had to work on those things. And when things are too painful, you just kind of throw yourself into what you know. And I knew that if I stayed busy enough and I just kept piling on work, I wouldn't have to deal with those things. So it still took me several years. When I finally got it was when there was an inner, deeper calling where I just almost started to hear nightly or every morning a whisper that says, when is enough enough? You're tired all the time, but for what? Why? Life shouldn't be that you're tired all the time. And at 35 years old was when I asked myself, what would it be like to live a life where you just allow trust and have divine faith that everything is all right, just as it is? I never knew what that felt like, Hass. I mean, I grew up in war. I was here, literally like a soldier as a young child, making sure that everything we had, my family, my schooling, everything was just always hard work because it was based out of fear or a sense of lack. And it was only when I asked myself that question, how about living or making decisions based on love and trust?
Amen.
That you have everything already, that there is no such thing as fear of loss. They're just lessons that you're going to be gifted. They're all gifts versus things being taken. And it wasn't until about 35 that I really started to question, ask myself, become more curious, go deeper with myself, take more time to garden, take more time to write poetry that wasn't an encryption so no one could know what was really happening. Because I used to do that. I used to write poetry so that if anybody ever opened up my journal, they didn't know what was going on. They're like, what's she talking about? So I used poetry to
That's interesting.
encrypt my life journey. And it wasn't until 35 that I actually wrote poetry that really honored my own journey. So the metamorphosis became that. It was still this imperfect balance for a long time. And then I just got tired of being tired. I got tired of not knowing what it felt like to just have joy consistently in my life without fear of something else falling apart. I just got tired. And then I'm like, this is not the kind of life I want. And we weren't gifted this beautiful thing called our existence to just be scared all the time. So that's how it all happened. I just started to take control of my own life and became the star of my own life, looked at myself in the mirror and said, you're amazing, you're beautiful. And to start loving myself. I deserved love. And that's one of the reasons why I fell in love again. It wasn't because I didn't have other people who could love me. It was because I was afraid to ever love again because of the loss, that anybody who came into my life, they couldn't access me, and I want people to access me. I want to be accessible. That's the only way I can access them and be a part of their lives fully. So that was my journey. Self-love had to happen for me to really own all of my gifts and then gift it away.
Beautifully worded. Yeah, it's very much that awareness shift, that reclaiming the seat of awareness. And I like how you phrased it as being tired of being tired. And when, when is enough enough? And that's very much mirrored my journey. And I sense for a lot of others that go through this deep transformation, that it's really a choice point of when are you going to choose to shift it? Because we have that power, we have that choice, we have that choice point. And it's really beautifully worded the way you brought it forward. Like that. Yeah. And it's interesting because for me, much like you, right? I jumped right into the work. I jumped right into keeping busy. And it's funny that, again, similarly, the mirroring of like encrypting my emotions when I was starting to dabble in my emotions and encrypting them still because of that fear of like holding it together in a sense was how I equated it. And that's interesting that you did that. So let me ask you, so in terms of this, the cocoon, then, you start to shift your perspective, you start to come out of it, and then you start to cherish and you start to open up. And that's a huge point as well that I'm glad you brought forward, that I think it was Rumi that said that, oftentimes when we keep, we close the door to our heart, we're keeping ourselves in as much as we are keeping others out. And it's really not allowing our heart to live our life, forced to really flow through and in. So I'm curious that at what point did you realize I'm not letting people in? I'm not choosing to open my heart. Was there a conscious like moment or experience that you had looking back in hindsight, or was it organic and it kind of seamlessly developed? Do you recall it all?
I think it was both. It was both organic in the sense that I had been doing it pretty much my whole life, that it was
Mm,
normal. I
interesting.
had normalized being closed. Um,
Mm,
I show up as an extrovert and I'm friendly and I love people and I gift a lot of my time and energy and I ask so much about you and I want to hear about you, and so that I could avoid giving you time to ask about me. So it's just like filling up the space of
namaste.
love and care so that you felt so loved. And then by the end of it, we don't have time.
Don't ask about me. Bye. Yeah.
Yeah, the meeting is ended, the party is over, and it's like, oh, thank goodness no one asked about me. And I didn't even know I was doing that. And it was only a few years ago, maybe even last year, where I was just like, holy crap,
Interesting.
that has been my MO. And then I complain about, well, how come no one really calls and asks about me? And it's like, no, silly. You created that. You can't blame anybody else for how they treat you. We train people how to treat us. And
Mm-hmm.
I've been training people my whole life by showing up as almost like a martyr. Like, okay, let me just be the mother. Let me take care of you. Oh, I'm good. I'm fine. Everything's great. And then you feel lonely.
Yeah.
You feel isolated. You feel like, God, nobody really cares about me.
Mm,
And then you start to feel like a victim to your own circumstance. But then I was like, no, 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 no. You get to create how you want your life to be, but you also get to reimagine a whole different relationship with yourself and how other people treat you by changing and shifting this pattern. And
mm-hmm.
so now it's really about, it's okay. You want to ask me how I'm doing? As long as you can allow me to be honest and not just give you that, yeah, I'm good. And just reshaping my world, has reshaping
Mm,
my world so that I can be an active participant, that I can be fully vulnerable to, that I can play with you as an equal and not just like, okay, she's the mentor or she's the leader or she's the host. And you look at my patterns and it's like, yeah, I always created spaces where I was leading somehow because it takes the onus away from really being seen.
mm. That's it. It's the hiding, right? It's the curbing our shine. And again, I marvel at how similar our paths have been in our, shall I say, coping strategies or MO, so to speak. Yeah, it's remarkable, really. It is, because I didn't notice any of that. And it's funny that you brought up the same existential loneliness as a leader, because it was not, it's similar to you. I think it was about a year and a half ago, where I realized like, oh wow, this is my doing, in the sense that I had already known everything is a choice. It was more of a deepening of that, an embodying of that, and a heart activation of that, of, okay, wow, I need to really bare my soul. And it's interesting because I sense for you a similar, like, did you feel that the more you did it, it's like training wheels, the more you bared your soul, the easier it became over time? Or did you have a different orientation to it as far as like this, the rapidity in which you, brought yourself out of that shell, so to speak?
I think it was very uncomfortable at first.
Hmm.
It was very hard. Um, but like you mentioned, you still have to choose it
Hmm.
because the old way wasn't working for you. Like it worked maybe from an outside perspective, and the feedback you were getting is, oh, she must be doing great. But it didn't work here anymore. And
What do you mean by that? Elaborate. When you said it didn't work for your heart, can you give me some of the symptoms, for instance? Because that's important, right? Because for every one of us, it's different. It may be similar. It's going to be a different expression of that.
yeah, I'll give a very simple example because
Mhm.
everybody can understand this. It's like social media.
Mm.
It's like my whole life has been um, Facebook timeline, right? It's like my whole life has been, okay, let me just put out the best version of me,
Mm.
talk about everything else, but not my full emotion. And then the loneliness, the sense of, wow, why am I not happy? Everything looks good on paper,
Mm.
and just not addressing it. And then it's finally like, um, admitting to myself, Malie, and this is before I met Victor and before I found love again, was all those about 7 years of really looking at my patterns
Mm.
and asking myself,
Mm.
well, no wonder you feel so lonely, because you've created a world where you don't want anyone in. And it really did come down to that simple, very simple and complex understanding of what was happening. I had such a deep fear of loss because of all of those passings in my life in a short period of time. I think it was like less than 7 years. I had 6 losses of people who weren't acquaintances.
Mm.
They were people who I deeply
Close.
loved.
Yeah.
And after the trauma and the trauma and the trauma and the trauma, it's like, I don't want to love anybody anymore. I'm done. And so I built those 7 years of healing. I wasn't really healing, I was building blocks
Mm.
and walls. I was doing it through becoming that workaholic. I was doing it through dating, not really. I was doing it through joining every single community and being the leader so no one can ask me
Mm.
as a member how I'm feeling.
Mm.
That's really what happened, Has. I mean, I just really found a great way of hiding. And it worked until it didn't work anymore. And so you asked me to elaborate on what you mean. You know when your heart isn't fulfilled. You know when everything else is supposed to feel a certain way based on textbook knowledge, but your soul is just dying every day, a little every day.
Mhm.
And you realize that you're losing energy. You realize that you're feeling down more often than you're feeling up, and you're like, what the hell? Everything is supposed to be fine. I designed a world where I am not going to be hurt, where I don't have love, and it just became so isolating. And I'm like,
Mm.
this is not a way to live.
Yeah, it's interesting. I call that the callousing of the heart. That you, and it was similar for me. After my brother passed, I realized that I was actually going into constriction and actually developing calluses or thickening of layers around it rather than healing it. So it does get worse before it gets better. I feel like that's nature's course in a sense. What's interesting is I think this is a very common dilemma for a lot of people having this experience. That, and it was definitely for me, and it seems like it was for you, that never again, right? And that it's really a deepening of that. You fall to get back up, to fall, to jump again, to jump even deeper and even more in love, even more in faith, even more in surrender and allowing. And it's interesting that for you it was similar, that you chose that, I'm not going to do this anymore. I need to like let life back in. I need to let love back in.
Mhm.
That's amazing that you had a similar parallel.
Yeah, and I love this journey and this conversation we're having because we are all human beings. We're obviously spiritual beings, but we live in human form. And we have to have real conversations like this where it's not just spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
we do live in the context of the skin.
Right.
We are in this capsule.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like if we're going to have real meaningful conversations about transformation, about spirituality, we also have to bring along the human aspect of this journey.
Mm-hmm.
That you don't just wake up one day and become completely transformed and transcend and enlightened and leave all of that behind.
Right.
Thank goodness when we leave this earthly plane, we can transcend and become, a part of everything again. But while we're still breathing in physical form, these conversations are helpful because a lot of people don't feel like they want to have spiritual conversations about transformation and enlightenment when they're in so much pain.
Mm-hmm.
When the human aspect of us is a reality,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to really address those things. Having a spiritual path does not mean that you stop being a human being.
Mm-hmm.
You just become a little bit more elevated in your thinking, in the expansion of your heart, in your willingness to be more curious. And I feel like we have to talk about these things because you don't wake up and give everything away just to become a spiritual guru.
It's interesting because that's a very real problem in spiritual bypass, in a sense, right? There's a lot of the really advanced spiritual community that are disconnected from their humanness, and I sense that that's what we're brushing against, is that we have to. I said it the other day, it came out very fluid. I wrote it down. I was like, oh, this is kind of clever. I said it organically and channeled it through that. It's through the valley of human experience that we reach the peak of enlightenment, and I found myself committing that bypass so many times that I didn't want to be back again in human form, that it was like, okay, let me bypass the emotions. Let me not feel. Okay, let me figure it out without feeling. And as you've articulated and elaborated and illustrated, we can't do that. Not only is it an inevitability that we have to go through that valley of human experience, it can kill us if we try to bypass it, as you've alluded to, and I experienced as well.
I also believe that when we start to treat others like we're better, because we have a little bit more knowledge on this particular area, it takes away from how much they know in their particular area. When you start to force your elevation, if you will, or transformation onto others, I think that can do the opposite. It can be very counterproductive, because we're all the same. We just have different levels of understanding and learning, but we're all the same in the sense that we're all on a journey. And I feel like that is something that does get a little misguided when you talk to the spiritual community that, like you alluded to, we can, when we get to a place of learning, get so excited. And it's like, you should know this by now. And even our tone, I'm very mindful to when I'm speaking and sharing new information of something that I just learned, to never ever have anyone feel like I'm a guru, or even a guide. It's really about sharing my journey in the hopes that it inspires them and attracts them to go on their journey. Versus, gosh, every time I talk to Molly, she's always talking about this and that, and it makes me feel like I have to be where she's at. And so you have people lose faith in themselves, in their journey. Why don't I feel that way when I meditate? Like I'm just going to give up, because every time she talks about meditating, she goes to this place. And then they don't know that I've been meditating with my grandmother since I was 5 years old. It didn't happen yesterday.
Yeah.
So I just want to mention that, because your podcast, this experience, this conversation reaches both. It's reaching the divine spiritual community and the secular, the everyday human beings who are walking around not even knowing what spirituality is. We have to first remember that we're all human beings trying to just make sense of the world right now.
Amen. Yeah, I was guilty of that spiritual elitism myself, not until too long ago. That it was that I was inadvertently, it was almost like a disservice that I was doing. That not only was I inadvertently putting people down without noticing the implicit the implications of what, like you said, the tone of excitement, not having the centeredness or the neutrality or that middle path, and then almost dismissing their progress or dismissing their process. And it was very much a process of really coming to terms with hubris and that debilitating pride that was my experience, and so it's good that you brought that up, because I was on the opposite end of that. I was doing that and not realizing it. So it's good that we're having both ends represented here, that I was so eager to show that I didn't realize it was dismissive, and it was actually belittling, and if anything, disempowering. Because it didn't encourage the progress, it discourages it, because again, people don't know the training we have, they don't know the grueling nature, and that's what the impetus for this was for me, that I didn't have a choice, in a sense, karmically, through God, my calling mission, that for me it's one of showing people the messy that I went through, because that's the only way it would balance out for me, perhaps, to say, hey, this is my humbling is probably not the right phrase for it. This is how I became whole with it and reconciled it, so to speak. So it's interesting that you brought that up, because I'll confess that was me, and my excitement was more debilitating for people. And it's like, I can't hang around with this guy. He's got these high expectations, like it wasn't even expectations, the way I was vibrating and showing up. So it's good that you brought that up. I'll be the case study for that. That was me.
Yeah. But also, it's not about dimming your light, though. It's not about dimming our light or anything like that. It's just about noticing and being mindful and meeting people exactly where they're at, without diminishing, again, where you are, diminishing your gifts and your talents at all, because those are yours. I mean, that's the stuff you want to lean into.
It's tough. It's tough. It's tough, because I recoiled, and that was my journey, because for me, it was an interesting experience. I had, she wasn't an aunt, in Persian family, Middle Eastern families, a lot of cousins, married cousins. So she was technically a aunt and a cousin of my mom. And she said something once, God bless her. I mean, she didn't know any better. She drew a graph, and this is like maybe I was 9 or 10, very, very impressionable young lad. And she said, here's everybody's energy. And then she drew my graph and she said, here's yours. That was a huge pain for me that I didn't realize left a very subconscious imprint. And so when I realized I was doing what I was doing a couple of years ago, I then almost fell into a recoil of shame of I'm too much. So it is, we need to be mindful, because we have lots of different energies in the universe, and we have lots of different expressions of that energy. And I sense that you and I represent variations of these energies and these responsibilities. So I would say anybody listening that we have to be mindful of catching ourselves not to fall into, like what you said, curbing the light. And that's why I mentioned this, because I would go back into, I suck, and shame, and I'm too much, and see, I'm coming off. And it was finding more of that power within, and that centered within for me, and that self-love. The Buddhist middle path is what I call it, the Taoist way. People ask me, what are you? And I'm very syncretic now. When I speak, I've had Taoists say, oh, you sound Taoist more, I think, is what, because I like that about Taoism. There's not too much and there's not too little. You want to strive for that middle zone, so that's very cool. So let's go shifting gears to kind of wind down. Other than what you said, before we get to the legacy and the quote, what tips do you have? Like, other than what you've already brought, which is profound and really impactful, and I like that it's a lot from your personal experience. If you were to say to any leaders listening, going through transformation or about to go through transformation, what tips do you have to not only get through the process, to amplify their light coming out in order to really optimize their transformation process? What tips come forward, if any, in addition to what you've mentioned?
Carve out a lot of alone time to get to know yourself. We've had a journey in this life where parents, loved ones, siblings, media, society, they have gifted us in many ways with different perspectives. I'll keep it positive. And shifted our truths, and we then start claiming them to be our own truths, and we start to regurgitate information as if they were purely came through for us or from us. So I would say the best tip that I learned for myself, but I also want to ask your audience, is to really schedule it.
Mm.
Schedule your dates with you.
Mm.
Schedule your time to go to the river by yourself.
Mm.
Schedule to take a long drive up the East Coast with you and spend as if that person in the passenger seat, your best friend that you haven't talked to in a long time, that other you, the real you, the soul you, is sitting with you, supporting you, guiding you. Debate it out. Like, talk about what's really mine and what's really the world stuff that has become what I believe is mine. Like, really, really spend time to date yourself, to peel away the onion and to ask yourself, what really does bring me joy? What do I love? Even if it's the silliest thing, I love it. I used to love it when I could just blow bubbles and just watch it, the colors, and like, what is it that bring back your innocence? Because
Mm.
that's really when you get closer and closer to your purest state, which is that soul level. If anything comes out of this message, is just date yourself and give yourself room to have those healthy debates, to peel away the onion and to fall in love with your soul. Because when you can do that, that's really when you can start planning for a new version of your life. If you don't like yourself, you're not going to really do a good job planning the best path in your life to live, because there's always going to be conflict. So that's my advice. I'm just going to keep it simple. Figure out how to date yourself and fall in love with yourself again. Know who you are.
Fall in love with yourself. So when you leave here, when you leave this plane, when you leave this realm, what do you want to be remembered for, legacy-wise?
That anyone who has ever been a part of my life felt like they belonged in my realm. That I created a sense of belonging, a sense of community, a sense of psychological safety. When someone thinks of me and they say, I don't know what it is about Malie, but anytime I'm in her presence, I just feel seen. I feel seen at the soul level. I feel seen at my purest state, no judgment.
Hmm.
And when people can feel that intense amount of love, that's when they remember that they have the DNA to grow wings.
Hmm. I like that. I think that's going to be the title of your episode. We have the DNA to grow wings. I was waiting for the pithy thing that was going to come through, and you've said quite a few. I was like, this is the one. I love that. And lastly, before we wrap up, what's your favorite inspired or quote that, is a mantra, so to speak? What's one quote that you'd want to leave with the audience?
Oh, I know my community, the Nebula community, knows this already. It's something that I came up with many years ago because there was just no other quote out there that really described what was going on in my heart. This is when I turned 35, and I realized that there was more soulful work to be done. And the quote is, "Everything is as it should be, or it would be something else."
And actually, one thing I forgot to ask you, why is community so important? Why Nebula? Why SOAR? Why is it that you do what you do? Before we wrap up, because I did forget to mention that, and that's something important that I wanted to spotlight for you.
It's my hero's journey. It's the story of my life. If it weren't for the community in Lao that supported my grandmother as a single mom to raise my mom in a healthy way so that she can give birth to me, if it wasn't for the community of people who answered my father's secret telegrams to help us escape Laos and get to the refugee camp, if it weren't for the community inside the refugee camp that bartered and cooked for each other to keep us alive, if it weren't for the small church in Maryland that with one deciding vote decided to sponsor our entire family from the refugee camp to the US, we wouldn't be here, we wouldn't be alive. So community is everything. Community saved my life, and community is what I believe building it is going to save and support so many lives. It's the work that I'm meant to do. And I know that is because I've been gifted with community so much that it's irrefutable and undeniable that that's mine to do.
I love that. That's so beautiful. together we're truly rising. We're really holding each other up and lifting one another up. I love that. Any final inspired anything coming through to wrap up?
Just thanks for seeing me, and thanks for allowing us in this world to be seen, to be vulnerable, to tell the truth, to tell our truth, and knowing that it's going to resonate with one other human being, if not millions, but one other human being that can claim what their purpose is in life and go do something powerful with it.
It's the best medicine, right? We're bringing forth our individual medicine. Our essence is the medicine. So it's a gift that you're sharing, and it's an honor. And thank you for being here, for being a part of this experience, for sharing as deep as you have, as openly as you have, and as inspired as you have. And I can tell you that you're already living your legacy. As I told Brian, you've made me feel seen, you know, in our few times already that we've interacted. You've been a remarkable space holder, and you have that gift. And I feel you're already living in that mission more and more. So I honor you. Thank you. I'm glad that you all got to experience the Soul Sisters marvelous share. Thank you, Molly, for being here, for sharing yourself. And thank you for watching another episode, The Vulnerable Power Show, where we dive deep into this not so scary place called vulnerability and go into this secret garden known as our hearts. So I will be the gardener outside waiting for you to get into the gardener. So thank you all and have a blessed day.